Okay, our next guest is a professional keynote speaker who used to give in person talks, but due to the pandemic has had to shift to delivering 100% virtual webinars. To tell us about his experience, let's bring in Joseph Liu. Joseph, great to see you. Thanks so much for your time today.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Before we get your advice for others on the ways that they can pivot their business, for example, tell us a little bit about your personal experience and the shift that you've had to undertake here.
Sure. Well, so if I kind of go back to beginning of 2020, my business was primarily focused on delivering keynotes and career workshops at business schools, predominantly in Europe and elsewhere. I did do some remote work in terms of my individual client work, and also I do host a podcast myself as a career consultant. But the vast majority of my work was done live in person in front of audiences. And in March 2020, all of those in-person talks just got canceled. And so I was facing a situation where, first of all, I was trying to figure out what that meant for my own business. Second of all, I was trying to figure out if I do need to adapt to this new way of virtual working, how am I going to do that?
Yeah, okay. Let's go back to March 2020. Talk us about how you were feeling when you were confronted, with this quite daunting situation.
Well, to be honest, I was pretty scared and I was dealing with a lot of anxiety at the time. It was about 8 years into I had me starting this business, and things had been going quite smoothly for me in my business. I was feeling pretty good about things. Suddenly the pandemic hits, and for me, the vast majority of my income actually comes from paid speaking engagements in person in front of audiences. So I was very concerned that this would deal a major blow to my business. I wasn't even sure that my work would necessarily survive. So I was definitely, to put it bluntly, quite panicked at the time.
Yeah, and rightly so. Talk to us about your experience since then over the past 18 months.
Okay, so what happened for me is in March of 2020, I basically went into a scramble and I thought, okay, I love speaking. I love being in front of audiences. Can't do that because all in-person activities have been canceled at this point. What can I do to pivot so that I can continue to do the work that I had been doing before, but to deliver it remotely? And fortunately for me, Zoom is a platform I had been very familiar with before, because it's a platform I've been using since 2016, both for my individual client calls, and also I've been using it for my podcast guest recordings. So I was familiar with the platform. I hadn't really used it that much as a webinar platform, although I had been hosting some virtual webinars before this point. So I basically just pivoted and I readapted my content so that I could shift everything online. I familiarized myself with all the webinar functionality of Zoom. And I also made a point to try to proactively communicate to my clients who had been hiring me for in-person activities that I was now delivering these webinars. And initially, I actually decided to host quite a few of those webinars for free, just to kind of demonstrate to them that I could still deliver the same kind of content, but in a virtual remote format.
Yeah, okay. What's your advice for businesses then who I guess are considering pivoting for the sake of surviving? I guess, as your personal experience shows, you can also thrive.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I would encourage them to think about a couple things. Is first of all, just your mindset around this new way of working, because this is the way of the future at this point. We're not going to be going back to traditional ways of working anytime soon or in the foreseeable future. So first of all, just accepting that this is going to be the new normal, and not necessarily looking at it as a liability, but as potentially an advantage for you. So what I encourage people to do, one of the topics I cover in actually my career sessions, is this topic of personal branding. And sometimes I cross paths with people who are very concerned about how they're going to come across in the virtual format. They're not sure how that affects themselves as a candidate, for example, if they're applying to jobs. And what I'd encourage you to think about is the fact that this can actually work to your advantage. If you can take advantage and take control of this virtual environment and really make it your own and look at it as a way for you to stand out and also differentiate yourself from other people, it's just another opportunity for you to reinforce your personal brand and to demonstrate your professionalism as a working individual in this new era of working remotely.
What are some of the things people can do to improve their virtual presence when it comes to, purchasing certain pieces of equipment and, making some simple tweaks to their home office setup?
Well, there's a couple things you can think about. First of all, just how you are delivering what you're saying on camera. So, for example, you can see me right now. I try to put myself up against a fairly neutral background here. You can make simple tweaks like elevating your laptop or your webcam so that you're looking directly into the camera instead of what most people do is to look down at their camera. So people are kind of looking up at you. You can make simple adjustments that don't necessarily require you to invest a tremendous amount of money. I know most of us can't afford to set up a full professional home studio. And so what you can do is just make sure you've got decent lighting. And it doesn't mean you need to go out and invest in professional lighting. You can just take a couple desk lamps, put them on the right and the left of you, which is exactly what I've done here. Make sure that you have invested into a decent microphone. You don't need to get a top of the line kind of microphone necessarily that you guys are using in studio, but a regular lavalier or lapel mic can actually sound really good on camera and also is very discreet on camera. I also suggest people to consider to invest in a decent webcam. So the one I'm on right now is a 1080p webcam. There are some that are worse, there are some that are better, but with a small investment, you can actually look pretty good on camera. And these are some of the investments that I've actually made myself as a public speaker so that I can look as professional as possible on camera.
Yeah, okay. Really great advice. Joseph Liu, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks so much for joining us here on Ticker News today.
Thanks for having me.